Welcome back to Carrion Creature Feature. I'm your morbid host, Aura, beckoning you into a world gone insane. Tonight's episode, 3 teens play a tabletop war game inside a bomb shelter, while the world outside descends into madness. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring that infernal bell to summon notifications from the abyss. Join our fanatical legion of the crazed, and stay tuned for relentless horror content. The red translucent dice rolled across the table, landing on a pair of 3s. A loud exhale of defeat followed as Jeremy reached down and removed the miniature plastic models from the table. "Damn it," Timothy said, looking away in disgust. Jeremy moved to the center of the table on the opposite end to grab his own set of green dice. "I get to fire a volley into your retreating squad," Jeremy said proudly. I shifted in my chair, looking at the arrangement of crafted miniature terrain made from cardboard and other materials. The small buildings and roads resembled our town, only in a post-apocalyptic setting. The detail was quite extraordinary, down to individually crafted shingles and shattered windows. The burnt hull of a car sat in the middle of a cracked road, with small bits of paper and other trash glued down to up the desolation factor. Jeremy and Stephen had spent months crafting the board, which ran the total length of 2 8-foot folding tables stacked side by side. Not only was the board intricately detailed, but Stephen had 3D printed and crafted items to go inside the various houses. One could simply lift the roof off of one of the small houses to discover it packed with appliances and furniture of all types. Jeremy rolled his set of green dice, coming up with 6s and 5s. "That's game, bitch," he said, removing the last figures from the board. Timothy skulked for a moment before extending his hand in a display of sportsmanship. Jeremy smiled and shook it with energetic glee. "So, what now?" I said, yawning and stretching my arms. "Let's play Deathbringer," Timothy said with an excited fervor. Jeremy moaned at the suggestion, taking a moment to consider his reply. You know without Otark the party will just get slain, right?" Otark was Stephen's character, a second-level fighter that acted as the party's primary melee output. Stephen had ventured out of the bomb shelter a week ago and was now something inhuman. We tried to warn him several times not to leave the shelter, but he wouldn't give up the idea that his family might still be alive. One night, after we had all crashed from playing 8 hours of Kingdom Death Monster, he snuck out. Jeremy was royally pissed. Not so much about the bad things getting inside the shelter, but more about the fact that we now had a stalled game that we couldn't finish. Jeremy was almost fanatical about finishing games. One time, we paused a game of Axis and Allies the night before I went to East Carolina University. After 2 semesters, I returned home to discover Jeremy had the same game set up, waiting to be completed. Timothy raked his hands through his long blonde hair, sending flakes of dandruff floating in the air. His face, a sheen of oil and acne, glistened under the fluorescent light of the underground shelter. We had been friends since middle school, and Timothy often confided in me when he felt nervous about things. He was smart, but like me, he didn't care for the demands of the world, choosing instead to invest in fantasy and role-playing games. "What if we tried to finish the campaign without him?" Timothy said. Jeremy shot a look of contempt back towards Timothy, answering without saying a word. "Time to eat?" I asked, looking towards the kitchen. "Yeah, I'm pretty hungry," Jeremy said, using his shirt to clean the lenses of his glasses. "MRE, Mountain House, ramen or canned soup?" Timothy asked, walking towards the kitchen. I groaned at the menu options before replying. "I'll take ramen." "MRE, but see if there's any chili mac left," Jeremy said. Timothy scratched his face before opening the overhead cabinet and rifling through the contents. The bomb shelter belonged to Jeremy's father, a man that I had never met before. From bits and pieces of conversation over the last 5 years, I concluded that he was very wealthy, lived abroad, and basically threw money at any issue. As for a mother, I never heard Jeremy speak about one, so I figured she was pretty much out of the picture. The bomb shelter was actually very large with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room and a kitchen, and a large storage room. Jeremy fantasized about post-apocalyptic scenarios, stocking the shelter with various survival tools, emergency food rations, and state-of-the-art surveillance equipment using his father's platinum credit card. After several years, we turned the shelter into our own private hangout, converting 2 of the bedrooms into game rooms, with enough toys and action figures to rival any game store. Being around Jeremy was like being around a rich uncle, only you had to stay on his good side. One time we went to a local game store, and he bought the latest Warhammer game set complete with paints and army codex. Without missing a beat, he turned to me and asked where my army was. When I explained the cost was just too high and I would continue to use my orcs, he pointed to the shelves and said, "Orcs are lame. Pick another army." $500 later, I walked out with a new Imperial Guard set. But like I said, Jeremy was spoiled and treated the rest of us as subordinates. It was an unspoken rule that Jeremy didn't lift a finger unless Jeremy wanted to. That meant carrying his book bag, cleaning his room, driving his car, and preparing his meals. You also didn't win every game. It was okay to win a few here and there, but you had to feed his ego. One time, Timothy was on a winning streak playing Nemesis, and Jeremy had had enough, ordering Stephen and I to hold Timothy down while he drew a dick on his forehead with a permanent marker. To add insult to injury, he made Timothy continue to play the night with the giant inked penis plastered on his forehead. Things continued like this for years, and one game night, Jeremy, Stephen, Timothy, and I were playing games like we always did in the bomb shelter, when our phones lit up with warning messages. Images of dark vortexes in the sky popped up. News alerts about massive creatures surfacing from the ocean. In one video, a massive tentacle the size of a skyscraper whipped about off the coast of Myrtle Beach. Then more reports about people committing acts of depravity and violence. It was like the world changed in a matter of minutes. Our neighborhood was soon engulfed in a green mist. Trees uprooted themselves and moved freely about. Grotesque abominations hid in the shadows of backyards. I remember watching Esmeralda, Jeremy's maid, scratch her own eyes out in the front yard of his house. Things got dark, really fast, and before you know it, we were running for our lives to the underground hideout. We closed the hatch on the shelter and cowered in the back storage room for 2 days. Fortunately, the shelter seemed to protect us from everything outside. Jeremy assured us he had enough supplies to last at least 5 years, that number changing to 8 when Stephen ventured out of the shelter. Timothy returned to the table where we sat, handing me a cup of hot ramen and an MRE bag to Jeremy. Jeremy tore the bag open, retrieving the main entree and the green heater bag. He placed the entree of chili mac inside the heater and proceeded to pour water over it until a chemical reaction occurred, causing the green bag to inflate. Once the heater was activated, he folded the edges of the bag and propped it against the leg of the table to continue cooking. "So, I had this idea for a new game," Jeremy said, emptying the rest of the MRE contents onto the table. Timothy and I both looked at each other. New games were always something to worry about, and it usually resulted in one of us being humiliated. "What did you have in mind?" Timothy said, a hint of trepidation in his voice. "You know Stephen is still outside walking around, right?" Jeremy said, opening a packet of peanut butter with his teeth. "But isn't he, changed?" I said, taking a bite of the hot noodles. "Yup, he's butt-fucking ugly as shit, which is an improvement over what he used to look like," Jeremy said with a laugh. Timothy pulled the wrapper off a chocolate moon pie before responding. "So, you've seen him?" "Oh yeah, the dumb fucker's trapped in the backyard. Can't figure out how to open a stupid gate. I can see him good on one of the shelter cams," Jeremy said, squirting a glob of peanut butter into his open mouth. The sentiment in which Jeremy spoke about Stephen made me uncomfortable. We all grew up with Stephen, went to movies with him, had birthday parties. Now he was being portrayed as some moronic nobody, all because he cared about his family more than being safe. I was thinking we try talking to him on the gate intercom. See if we can get a rise out of him or something, Jeremy said, now shifting to his heated entree. Timothy took a small bite of the moon pie, a look of apprehension written on his face. I crossed my arms, a sudden chill in the air despite the hot steaming noodles in front of me. Jeremy sat down his entree, motioning us to the media room where two 15-inch monitors were set up, displaying the outside of the bunker. In the past few weeks, I had learned not to stare at the images on the camera for too long, unless I wanted nightmares. In the first few days, we watched the cameras non-stop with morbid fascination. There was nothing more enthralling than live footage of the apocalypse being broadcasted directly to you in the safety of your bunker. Jeremy sat in the gaming chair, fumbling with the mouse and enlarging the backyard camera feed. The footage was black and white, an indication it was dark outside and being recorded in infrared. The backyard was unchanged as I remembered it. A good-sized swimming pool in the center, where we used to lounge during the hot summers. Manicured holly bushes on the west side of the property. A stone path leading to the wrought iron backyard gate. And there was Stephen, hunched beside it. Jeremy zoomed the camera in on Stephen, the footage now more grainy, but still able to pick out the inhuman qualities he exhibited. "What the fuck is wrong with his face?" Timothy exclaimed. "I told you, it's an improvement," Jeremy said with a sneer. Stephen's body was now host to all manners of repulsion. Viscous fluid leaked from his open boils. Worms the size of thick cables squirmed underneath his stretched skin. Black thorns resembling horns protruded from his face. Jeremy pulled an intercom microphone close to his lips and spoke. "What's up, dickhead?" I cringed at the comment, sticking my hands into my pockets and looking to Timothy, who stared intently at the display screen. "Hey, dumb fuck, I'm talking to you," Jeremy said with a laugh. Stephen's head twitched toward the gate intercom as he inspected it with the wonderment of a small child. Jeremy leaned forward in his chair, this time speaking in a sing-song rhythm. "Stephen, hello, can you hear me?" Stephen's body stood straight as he reached for the intercom, pushing the call button. A ghostly voice echoed through.
"Hello, Jeremy."
Jeremy sat back in his chair, trying to mask a sense of fear that was evident in his movements.
"I had forgotten about you all, but it's all coming back to me now,"
Stephen said, his voice a mixture of several other voices, both human and inhuman. "Cut it off, Jeremy, please," Timothy said, moving towards the intercom module. Jeremy, snapping out of his haze, jerked the intercom away from Timothy. "God help you if you touch my intercom," Jeremy said, a voice steeped in anger. Unsettled by Stephen's reply, I spoke up. "Jeremy, I don't like this game. Let's play something else." Jeremy looked at me, then back to Timothy, and then spoke into the microphone. "Stephen, you don't scare me. You look more pathetic now than you did before the end of the world. How about doing me a favor and fucking die?" This time, Stephen turned around until his grotesque face stared directly into the camera. With an outstretched arm, he mashed the intercom button.
"I think it's time we play my game,
Jeremy."
The camera screen flickered bright and then went to static, followed by a loud screeching noise that caused me to step away from the media station. I could see Timothy also retreating, his fingers stuffed in his ears, eyes closed from the awful noise. Jeremy dropped to the floor, pulling at cables until the intercom went silent. My heart pounding, I stepped forward, wiping the sweat from my face. "What the fuck, Jeremy?" I screamed. Jeremy, clearly shaken, pulled himself up to the game chair and swirled it around to face Timothy and me. He took a few deep breaths before a smile formed across his face. "Woohoo! That was crazy, man!" Jeremy said, his face turning a bright shade of red. Timothy exhaled loudly, bringing both hands to rest on top of his head. Fuck me, that was intense. Both Jeremy and Timothy started to laugh, when suddenly, a shelter alarm went off. We all looked at each other with scared, confused looks. That's the decontamination alarm, Jeremy said, bolting from his seat and running towards the shelter entrance. Both Timothy and I followed closely behind, watching as he disengaged the large steel hatch leading to the air purification room. Once inside, he made his way over to the entrance door, pressing the power to a 6-inch monitor fastened to the wall. The monitor glowed to life, revealing Stephen, with a host of other monstrous creatures, packed tightly within the confines of the small decontamination room. Stephen peered into the monitor with an oversized reptilian eye that darted back and forth. We stood frozen in terror as slimy tentacles pressed firmly against the bulkhead, making the outer hatch groan. He can't get in here, can he? I said, a sense of panic echoing in the words. Jeremy looked to me, his body trembling. No, I don't think so. Weapons, man, we gotta get weapons, Timothy exclaimed. Jeremy nodded, ushering us out of the room and sealing the hatch behind him. We rushed to the master bedroom where Jeremy dropped to the floor, pulling a hard rifle case from under the bed. With shaky hands, he opened the case, revealing an AR-15 rifle with a few boxes of ammo and 2 empty magazines. What about us? Timothy asked. Jeremy pointed to his dresser where a cheap katana sword sat on display. You bought that for $20 at a flea market, Timothy shouted. Jeremy ignored his rebuttal, ripping one of the cardboard ammunition boxes open, the shiny brass shells falling on top of the bed comforter. Jeremy picked one of the bullets up, looking at it, and then back to the rifle with a look of puzzlement. You know how to use that, right? I questioned. An ear-splitting roar of torn steel reverberated through the shelter, causing Jeremy to involuntarily jump. I pushed past Timothy and grabbed one of the steel magazines, loading the shell into it as fast as I could. Jeremy, visibly shaken, relented and walked to the corner of the room, staring out the entrance. I finished loading the magazine with the last of the bullets and slammed it into the rifle. Taking a step towards the door, I charged the bolt, then placing the weapon on fire. Another loud crash came from down the hall, signaling the last hatch had been breached. Stephen and his companions were now inside. The shelter lights dimmed and went dark. For a moment, we sat in pitch black until the red glow of emergency lighting flickered on. We backed against the bedroom wall, dropping to our knees and seeking cover behind the bed. For a moment, the room was silent except for our collective breathing. The air was saturated with the smell of body odor and dread that seemed to linger in the cool confines of the steel shelter. My eyes stayed focused on the doorway, seeking movement within the crimson hues of the emergency lighting. I gotta piss, Timothy whimpered. Shh! Shut up, stupid! Jeremy hissed. Is there an emergency exit? I whispered. Jeremy seemed to be lost in thought for a moment, but then turned to me in revelation. In the storage room, there's a small hatch that leads outside, Jeremy whispered. I nodded my head and stepped forward, raising the rifle in the air. Quietly, we moved out of the bedroom into the main hall and began to backtrack through the kitchen. Shadows danced on the walls, accompanied by wet sloshing sounds. The storage room was straight ahead, past the game table where we just sat moments ago. My steps quickened, both Timothy and Jeremy matching my pace. We were feet away when Stephen's guttural voice stopped us dead in our tracks.
Where are you going?
We turned slowly to see Stephen in the kitchen, his features disproportionate to his body, but concealed in the dim light. I could make out what appeared to be a series of giant crab-like legs that protruded from his body, propelling him across the floor. The walls of the shelter were adorned with large flesh-like tumors and eyes that thirsted for blood. My fear was interrupted by a sound I had heard many times before. The sound of plastic impacting against a surface. The sound of dice being rolled. In front of us, a single 20-sided die rolled, coming to a stop at our feet. Keeping my eyes on Steven, I knelt, taking the plastic icosahedron die in hand.
Let's play a
Game.
Steven said, his voice now twisting in on itself. Timothy pressed tight against me as one of the wall tumors transformed into a set of needle-like teeth. "Rules?" I shouted.
10 or
higher.
You walk.
I looked to Timothy, and then to Jeremy. An unspoken collective fear shared amongst the group. Turning back to Steven, I swallowed hard, grasping the die firmly in my hand. My stomach gurgled, and my legs shook with anxiety. Closing my eyes, I released the die, allowing it to fall freely to the floor. A few seconds passed before I opened my eyes and looked down. The numbers were too small to make out in the dim light, forcing me to stoop down. I took the die between my thumb and index finger, careful not to disturb the face-up number, and brought it close to my face. 12, I said, a feeling of relief washing over me. "Yes, we're free!" Timothy exclaimed.
No. He's free.
Steven interrupted. Timothy's excited face turned pale as the realization hit him. I placed the 20-sided die into his hands and nodded. Timothy swallowed hard and rolled. The clatter of plastic on the vinyl floor seemed to be the only audible sound in the shelter. The die came to a stop 2 feet away from our group. Timothy stood still, prompting me to nudge him on his shoulder. He moved forward, picking it up as I had done earlier. Breathing deeply, he inspected the die and then looked to Steven. 14. Timothy then handed the dice to Jeremy. Jeremy looked down at the die, as he had done so many times before, and stepped forward. There was a stagger in his step, as if he knew the odds. He looked to Steven, holding the die up in front of him. "You could never beat me then, and you won't now," he said before shaking the die in his left hand and letting it fly with confidence. The die hit the shelter floor, tumbling a good 4 feet away before coming to a rest. Jeremy pushed past us, retrieving it. Bringing the die closer to his face, he adjusted his glasses, trying to make out the number. Jeremy went rigid, dropping the die to the ground and looking back to us. "No way, man. I can re-roll," he said, walking towards us. A long tentacle covered in hairy spines shot out from the dark, wrapping itself around Jeremy's waist. He struggled to free himself, his face going blank as he looked up to us. Blood began to seep from his nose and eyes. Jeremy grimaced, bringing his hand up to his face and pushing his glasses free as the tentacle coiled more tightly around his body. Jeremy stretched his arms out towards us, silently pleading for us to save him. I grabbed Timothy by his shoulder and pulled him into the storage room. There, I unlocked the escape hatch and shoved him inside. We both climbed to the top using a ladder, then releasing the last hatch for our escape. I stumbled out, making my way to Timothy, who stood motionless looking towards the sky. His blonde hair was now white, and his eyes bulged in the moonlight. In the sky, blue lightning ripped through the air as titanic creatures swirled in the clouds. Behind us, a deformed tree moved across the neighbor's backyard. On the street, a procession of people chanted strange and unnatural words to the heavens. I hope you're still alive after that ghastly tale. As we conclude our feature, our thanks to the bravest among you, true believers in the beyond. Before you retreat, take a moment to leave your thoughts, fears, and suggestions in the comments below. Like, share, and summon your fellow thrill seekers to join our dark congregation. And most importantly, don't forget to hit that bell. Until our next dive into the void, stay haunted, stay vigilant, and always expect the unexpected. This is Carrion Creature Feature, bidding you farewell.